My name is Marco. I'm a history buff, an urban explorer, or at least I used to be. Now, I'm just a man with too many shadows in his head. And it all started with Povelia Island. You've probably heard the stories. The Plague Island, the Asylum, the most haunted island in the world, they call it. And for good reason. My buddy Luca, he dared me. A casual challenge over too many beers. Go to Povelia, he said. Spend a night. Prove you're not a coward. I laughed him off, but the idea, it burrowed into my mind. I'd been to plenty of abandoned places, felt the chill of decay, the weight of forgotten lives. But Povelia felt different, even before I stepped foot on it. It was guarded, forbidden. You need special permission, or you need to be very, very discreet. We chose the latter. We managed to bribe a fisherman to take us over just before dusk, promising him double if he came back for us in the morning. He looked at us like we were crazy. Maybe we were. The moment our small boat cut through the water towards the island, the air grew heavy, thick with a scent I can only describe as ancient dust and something sweet, yet metallic, like old blood. The island itself, it rose out of the Venetian lagoon like a crooked skeletal finger. And then I heard it for the first time, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper on the wind. It wasn't the sound of the sea. The whisper wasn't words, not yet. Just a soft, sibilant murmur, like dry leaves rustling across old stone. It felt like 100 quiet breaths exhaled at once. The fisherman dropped us off on the crumbling dock, his face pale, and sped away without another word. Luca, always the skeptic, clapped me on the back. Relax, Marco, just the wind. But even his voice sounded a little forced. We walked onto the island, our boots crunching on fallen masonry and overgrown weeds. The main path led straight to the bell tower, a skeletal spire silhouetted against the dying light. It was an iconic landmark, a symbol of Povelia. And then I saw them. Not ghosts, not yet, but the plague pits. Shallow depressions in the earth, barely visible beneath the grass, where thousands upon thousands of plague victims had been piled and burned. The soil itself seemed to pulse with a dark energy. I felt a chill, not from the evening air, but from something deeper. An overwhelming sadness, a crushing weight of despair that settled over me like a shroud. Luca tried to make a joke, something about restless spirits, but his voice trailed off when he heard it too. The whispers were louder now, no longer just a murmur. They were closer. They were all around us, and they were trying to say something. We pushed deeper into the island, heading for the main asylum building. It stood like a hulking, silent beast in the center, its windows like vacant eyes staring out at the lagoon. The whispers intensified with every step. They were fragments of sound, like snippets of conversations, heard through a thick wall. Cries, moans, sometimes a word, help, or cold. Luca pulled his flashlight from his pack, its beam cutting through the gloom, making the shadows dance like tormented figures. It's just the wind in the broken glass, he insisted, but his grip on my arm was tight. My stomach twisted with a sickening dread, a feeling that something profoundly wrong had happened here, and that the echoes of it were still very much alive. We found the entrance to the asylum, a heavy wooden door hanging off its hinges, revealing a maw of utter darkness. The air inside was impossibly cold, damp, and smelled of decay and something else, something sharp and metallic, like rusty surgical instruments. We stepped inside, our flashlights sweeping over peeling paint, crumbling plaster, and discarded beds. And then I saw it, a rusted leather restraint strap, still buckled, hanging from a bed frame. And that's when the whispers changed. They weren't just cries for help anymore. They sounded like accusations. The accusations weren't directed at us, not directly. They seemed to swirl through the air, aimed at the very walls, the very essence of the place. We explored the first floor, a maze of small, claustrophobic rooms. Each one felt like a tomb. I found an old, faded drawing on a wall, scratched into the plaster by a desperate hand. It was a crude stick figure, but the eyes were wide with terror, gazing at something unseen. And next to it, scratched even deeper, were 3 words: "They are here." I felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to flee, to run back to the boat, to get off this island as fast as I could. But Luca was already moving, drawn by a morbid curiosity, his flashlight beam disappearing down a dark hallway. The whispers followed him, rising and falling like a tide. I heard a distinct, ragged gasp. Right behind me, I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. But there was nothing, just the empty, oppressive silence of the room. I reached out, my hand trembling, and touched the drawing. The plaster was cold, but beneath it, I felt a faint vibration, as if the wall itself was humming with a lingering torment. And then, from the hallway where Luca had gone, I heard a new sound, a low, guttural moan that was undeniably human. I ran down the hallway, shouting Luca's name, my own voice swallowed by the oppressive silence of the asylum. The moan had stopped, replaced by a frantic scuttling sound, like something large being dragged across the floor. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but more decaying rooms. "Luca!" I yelled again, a tremor in my voice. And then I heard his reply. It wasn't his voice. It was his voice. But it was twisted, distorted, stretched out like taffy, echoing as if it came from deep inside a well. He was shaking, convulsing, and whimpering like a trapped animal. "They're here," he gasped, his voice barely a whisper. "They're everywhere." I tried to pull him, to drag him away, but his eyes were fixed on the empty space in front of him. And then I felt it too, a cold, spectral touch on my arm, as if an icy hand had reached out from the void. And the whispers. They were screaming now. The screams weren't audible with my ears. Not exactly. They were in my head, a cacophony of suffering and rage, thousands of voices all crying out at once. My vision swam, and for a terrifying moment, I saw them. Shadowy figures, translucent and writhing, swirling around Luca, pressing in on him. Their faces were stretched in agony, their mouths open in silent screams. They were the plague victims. They were the insane. And they were furious. Luca started to babble, incoherent words tumbling from his lips, his eyes rolling back in his head. He was talking to them, responding to their silent screams. He was going mad, just like the patients who had been confined here. I knew, with chilling certainty, that this island didn't just contain the spirits of the dead. It contained their madness, their despair, and it infected anyone who stayed too long. I fought against the spectral hands that tried to hold me, the whispers that tried to break my mind. I had to get Luca out. I had to get us out. I dragged him, pulling him stumbling through the dark hallways, the whispers growing louder, morphing into mocking laughter. The laughter felt like needles in my brain, driving me closer to the edge. We reached the main door, the one we'd entered through. It was shut, jammed tight, and from somewhere in the darkness behind us, I heard a clear, distinct voice. Not a whisper, a single, cold, sane voice that curdled my blood. You cannot leave. My blood ran cold. The voice wasn't ancient, it wasn't tormented. It was calm, measured, and utterly chilling. It belonged to the director of the asylum, the one who was rumored to have conducted gruesome experiments on the patients, driven mad by the island himself, before throwing himself from the bell tower. He wasn't just a spirit, he was the master of the madness here. Luca was still babbling, fighting against me now, his eyes glazed over. They want us to stay, he whimpered. They want us to join them. The door. I threw my shoulder against it again and again, the wood splintering but refusing to yield. The director's voice echoed in my mind, closer now. Such defiance. It only makes the process more interesting. I felt a paralyzing fear. This wasn't just about escape anymore. It was about my mind, about my sanity. I looked at Luca, his eyes now completely vacant, a strange, serene smile spreading across his face. He was gone. The island had claimed him. I couldn't let it claim me. I screamed, a primal sound of pure desperation, and managed to kick a hole in the rotted wood of the door, just big enough to squeeze through. I left Luca behind. I left him. I ran, blindly, through the night, the whispers chasing me all the way to the dock. I somehow made it back to the dock, my lungs burning, my legs screaming. The fishing boat was there, a beacon of sanity in the encroaching madness. I don't remember getting in. I don't remember the ride back to the mainland. All I remember is the fisherman's wide, terrified eyes when he saw me. He didn't ask questions. He just drove. They found Luca's body 3 days later, on the island. He was smiling. The doctors say I suffered a psychotic break, extreme exposure. But I know what happened. I know what's there. I got off Poveglia, but Poveglia never left me. The whispers, they're quieter now, but they're still there. In the back of my mind, a constant, low murmur just beyond comprehension. Sometimes, late at night, I hear a clear voice, the director's voice, telling me to come back. And when I look in the mirror, sometimes, for just a second, I see a fleeting shadow behind my own eyes. I know what it is. It's the island. It's waiting. And I'm afraid that one day I'll stop fighting and I'll finally listen to the whispers and go back home. The second story drags us deeper into the shadows. I've always been drawn to places with a story. Aokigahara, at the base of Mount Fuji, has a legend darker than any other. Locals call it the Sea of Trees, but to the rest of the world, it's just the suicide forest. I went there not to die, but to understand. My name is Kenji, and I'm a writer. My goal was simple: hike the marked trails, spend a few days immersed in the infamous silence, and write. About what it was like. Simple, right? The moment I stepped off the paved road and into the woods, the world went quiet. The trees are so dense, their roots a twisted maze over the volcanic rock, that they swallow sound. I expected silence, but this was different. It was a complete and utter lack of sound. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just the muffled crunch of my boots on the mossy ground. It was like I had stepped into a soundproof room, and the air itself felt heavy, thick with a sadness I couldn't explain. I walked for about an hour, following a designated trail. I saw the signs, the ones with the encouraging messages and a hotline number. A quiet, sobering reminder of why this place is so famous. I took a photo, but when I looked at the screen, a strange, dark blur seemed to hover in the trees just behind me. It was probably just a trick of the light. Probably. But for the first time, I felt a tremor of doubt. I continued deeper into the forest, leaving the trail and heading towards a landmark on my map. An old, hollowed-out tree that was supposed to be a point of interest. The moment I left the trail, my compass went wild. The needle spun like a top, refusing to settle. It's an urban legend, a myth, they say. But it was happening. I tried to retrace my steps, but everything looked the same. The trees were so thick, and the ground was a labyrinth of twisted roots that defied any sense of direction. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach, the kind you get when you realize you're truly, deeply lost. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was just a local magnetic anomaly. Then I heard it, a sound. It was faint, like a sigh carried on a non-existent breeze. I stopped and listened. It came again, a bit closer this time. A low, sorrowful whisper that seemed to echo from the trees themselves. I spun around, my heart pounding, but there was nothing. No one. Just the suffocating, unnatural silence. I took another step, and the whisper came again, louder. "Don't. Go," it said, the words slurring together as if spoken by a very tired person. I was alone, miles from anyone, and the forest was talking to me. I tried to rationalize it. The wind, maybe. The acoustics of the dense trees. But my gut, the primal part of my brain, screamed. It wasn't the wind. The air was dead still. I started to pick up my pace, a frantic energy building inside me. I had to get out. As I pushed through the tangled undergrowth, I heard new whispers, a chorus of them. They weren't speaking words, just murmuring in a low, continuous drone. It was like I had stumbled into a graveyard of ghosts all, whispering their endless laments. And then I saw something, a faint, glowing apparition standing between two trees. It was translucent, a pale, wavering figure with long, dark hair covering its face. It was just standing there, motionless, and it wasn't solid. It was like smoke or a wisp of fog. My breath hitched in my throat. I couldn't move. I just stared at it, and a wave of profound sorrow washed over me, a feeling of absolute, soul-crushing despair. It was the deepest, darkest depression I had ever felt, all in a single, terrifying wave. I stumbled back, falling over a root, and when I looked up, it was gone. But the feeling stayed with me. It felt like I had been hit by a tidal wave of grief that wasn't my own. I had to get away from that spot. I ran, not caring about the trail anymore, just trying to put distance between myself and that feeling. The whispering followed, a continuous maddening sound that grew louder with every stride. The trees seemed to close in on me, the branches twisting into unnatural, reaching shapes. I found myself in a small clearing. I saw a tent, a rope, and then a backpack. It was a campsite. Someone had been here. I looked down, and a strange detail caught my eye. A pair of boots, neatly placed side by side, pointing away from the tent. As if the person who wore them had simply vanished. A chill ran down my spine, colder than any I had felt before. And then I heard a voice right behind me, a sharp, angry whisper, "Leave us alone." I whipped around, ready to fight, but there was nothing there. But the whisper wasn't a lament anymore. It was a threat, and it wasn't a lone voice. The chorus of whispers returned, but this time they were hostile. I felt a sudden push from behind, a cold, spectral shove that sent me sprawling into the mud. I scrambled to my feet, my heart hammering in my chest, and that's when I saw them, not as apparitions, but as subtle distortions in the air, a shimmering of heat and a twisting of light, all around me. They weren't just watching me, they were hurting me. I was no longer just lost, I was being herded. The whispers from all directions pushed me deeper into the forest, a cruel game of cat and mouse. They wanted me to go a certain way. I tried to defy them, to turn back towards the trail, but the moment I did, the voices grew loud and violent. A shriek, piercing and full of rage, rang through the air. And from the corner of my eye, I saw a flash of movement. A figure darting between the trees, impossibly fast. It was a glimpse of a gaunt, dark shape, its limbs impossibly long and spindly. It wasn't a ghost anymore. It was something else. A jinn, a spirit of the forest. The legends say these spirits can drive people to madness, to despair, and they can lure them to their doom. And it was luring me. I ran, a blind, panicked dash through the trees, my only goal, to escape the terrible whispers and the shadowy figure. I don't know how long I ran, but the forest began to change. It became darker, the trees closer, their roots more gnarled, and the air grew even colder. A profound chill that felt like a burial. The whispers were no longer just sounds. They were a stream of consciousness, a telepathic torrent of regret, sorrow, and deep-seated despair. It was the sum of every terrible feeling the forest held. The telepathic onslaught was 100 times worse. Then the whispers. It was like having 1,000 broken minds screaming inside my own head. I saw images in my mind's eye, darkened hotel rooms, a face contorted in agony, an empty park bench. It was the final, haunting moments of the people who died here. A psychic replay of their misery. They weren't just trying to scare me. They were trying to break me, to make me one of them. I stumbled, my knees giving out, and I saw a shallow depression. In the ground ahead of me, I looked down and saw an old faded sign, barely legible beneath the grime. Please think of your family. My mind was a storm of despair, but something clicked. An old tale about the jinn of the forest. They feed on sorrow. They can't create it. They can only amplify what's already there. I forced myself to think of something else. Something happy. My family. My mother's smile. Anything but the darkness. The moment I did, the telepathic voices became a dull roar, the psychic assault weakening. They didn't want me to be happy. They wanted me to be like them, and they were getting angry. A cold hand brushed the back of my neck, and the voice returned, clear and malevolent. You don't belong. I clawed my way to my feet, my mind a mess of conflicting emotions, and ran with what little strength I had left. The whispers returned, a wave of rage and frustration now, angry at my resistance. The trees seemed to lean in, their branches scratching at my clothes. But I pushed through, clinging to the memory of the sun and the warmth of a happy moment. And then I saw it. A glint of metal through the trees. A signpost. A trail marker. I was out. I ran the final few feet, collapsing onto the road, gasping for breath. The sunlight, a glorious, painful relief. The sounds of the real world, the chirping of birds, the hum of distant traffic were the most beautiful things I had ever heard. I looked back into the forest, at the wall of dark, impassive trees, and I saw a face. Not a ghost, but a distinct face of a man etched into the bark of a tree. It was the expression of someone who had given up. And as I watched, the face seemed to weep, black tears of sap running down the trunk. I got in my car and drove fast. I drove until the trees were a distant memory in my rearview mirror. But the whispers, they never left. The doctors say it's post-traumatic stress, that I was just lost and my mind played tricks on me. I tell them I'm fine. I tell them the nightmares are gone, but they're not. They're just different now. The whispers don't come from the outside anymore. They're here, in my head. They're a faint, constant murmur just beneath my thoughts. A low drone of unending sadness. Sometimes, when I'm alone in a quiet room, I hear it. The sound of a single, drawn-out sigh. I can be happy. I can laugh. But the feeling of profound despair is always there, waiting. I think a piece of me, a piece of my mind, is still in that forest, walking those endless trails. And every night I go to sleep in my bed, but I wake up in Aokigahara. And I'm afraid that one day, my soul will finally catch up to the rest of me, and I'll be home. This is the second story, a place you won't want to step into. My name is Arthur. For 5 years, I was a tour guide at Eastern State Penitentiary, that sprawling, Gothic monstrosity in the heart of Philadelphia. A dry, almost academic tone, but with a subtle tremor beneath. Most people come for the history, the famous inmates like Al Capone, the sheer architectural marvel of it. They leave with ghost stories. Sure, a few goosebumps. They don't leave with what I left with. I always prided myself on my professionalism, my ability to weave the tales of solitary confinement, the brutal Pennsylvania system, without letting the darkness get to me. It's just a building, I'd tell myself, brick and mortar. But it's never just a building, is it? Not when it's held that much pain. The first thing that always got to me was the silence. Even with hundreds of tourists, there's a deafening quiet that settles into the cell blocks. Like the walls themselves are sucking the sound out of the air. We'd tell the visitors that it was designed that way, the vaulted ceilings absorbing noise. But sometimes, when I was alone, closing up at night, that silence felt deliberate, like it was holding something in. I started hearing things, small things at first. A faint scraping sound from a locked cell, a whisper that seemed to brush past my ear when no one was there. I dismissed it as fatigue, the old building settling. But one night, after everyone had left, I swore I heard footsteps. Not heavy security guard footsteps, but light, shuffling ones, like someone padding barefoot down a distant cell block. The shuffling footsteps became my nocturnal companion. Every night, after I'd locked the main gate, they'd start. Sometimes faint, sometimes louder, always just out of sight. I never saw anything, but I always felt like I was being watched. My shift usually ended around midnight, but I found myself lingering, drawn by a morbid curiosity. I'd walk the empty corridors, my flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive gloom, half hoping, half dreading to find the source. We tell the story of Screaming Jenny, an inmate in cell block 12 who supposedly still screams from her solitary confinement. I'd always found it amusing, a good bit of theater for the tourists. Until one night, I was passing cell block 12 and I heard it. A sharp intake of breath, a sudden drop in tone, a low, guttural moan coming from deep within one of the cells. It was too real, too full of suffering to be a trick of the light or my imagination. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs, convinced I'd stumbled upon a squatter, a trespasser. I shouted, "Hello? Is anyone there?" The moan stopped. But then, from another cell, closer this time, a slow, deliberate tapping began. 1 tap, 2 taps, 3 taps. It sounded like someone was trying to communicate. The tapping came from cell block 4. I knew the history of that block. It was notorious for its mad inmates, where they tried experimental and often cruel treatments for mental illness. The silence in cell block 4 was even heavier than the rest of the prison. The tapping continued, a steady, rhythmic sound that drew me in. I walked down the central aisle, my flashlight beam dancing over the rusted cell doors. The air grew impossibly cold, and I could smell something faint but unsettling, like old, damp cloth and something metallic, like stale blood. I stopped at the cell where the tapping was coming from. It was completely dark inside. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice barely audible in the crushing silence. The tapping stopped. Then, from directly behind the heavy steel door, I heard a new sound. A low, mournful sigh. It sounded like the breath of someone who had given up all hope. I pressed my ear against the cold metal door, my heart pounding. And then I heard it, a whisper, right against my ear, as if someone was speaking through the tiny crack. "Can't leave." The words were slurred, ancient, filled with an unimaginable despair. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. It wasn't my imagination. It wasn't the wind. It was real, and it was speaking to me. I sprinted down the cell block, the whisper echoing in my head, a chilling mantra. "Can't leave. Can't leave." I tried to rationalize it. Carbon monoxide poisoning? Lack of sleep? Anything but the truth. But the fear was too visceral, too absolute. As I ran past a row of cells, my flashlight beam caught something. A quick flicker of movement in an open doorway. Not a shadow. Not a trick of the eye. A figure. It was indistinct. A wavering, translucent form that seemed to shimmer in the stale air. It was a man, thin and gaunt, his face gaunt with suffering, his eyes hollow pits of despair. He was wearing old, striped prison clothes. He just stood there, watching me, his head tilted slightly, as if confused by my panic. I felt a wave of profound sadness wash over me, a crushing weight of regret and despair that wasn't my own. It felt like someone else's lifetime of suffering had just been poured into my mind. Voice cracks, immense emotional weight. I fell to my knees, overwhelmed by the sheer, unbearable grief. He wasn't just a ghost. He was the embodiment of every hopeless soul trapped within these walls. And then, from the cell directly behind me, I heard the tapping begin again. Faster now, more insistent. It sounded like someone in a frenzy. I scrambled away from the kneeling figure, the sorrowful ghost now seeming to sway and shimmer with a new, frantic energy. The tapping was a desperate crescendo, driving me mad. I tried to focus, to get my bearings, but the walls themselves seemed to distort, the long corridors stretching into impossible lengths. The spectral figure in the striped uniform was no longer still. It glided towards me, its hollow eyes fixed on my face, and from its mouth came a silent scream of agony. I felt a cold touch on my hand, a skeletal grip that was impossibly firm. It wasn't trying to scare me. It was trying to take me, to pull me into its endless torment. I fought, tearing my hand free, and ran, my only thought to get out of cell block 4. But as I reached the end of the corridor, I saw another figure, and another, and another. They were everywhere. Dozens of them, shadowy forms emerging from every cell, from every dark corner, their eyes fixed on me. They were the inmates, the ones who never left. They were all silent, but the air around them vibrated with their collective despair, their rage, their eternal suffering. They weren't just haunting the prison. They were the prison. I was trapped, surrounded by a silent, ghostly army of tormented souls. I backed away slowly, my heart a drum in my ears, my rifle feeling useless in my shaking hands. They didn't move quickly. They just glided towards me, slowly, relentlessly, their vacant eyes full of an ancient hunger. The air grew colder with every step they took, until my breath came out in sharp, painful gasps. I could feel their presence, their overwhelming sorrow pressing in on me from all sides. It felt like being buried alive. I heard the voice again, the dry, raspy whisper, but now it was a chorus, 1,000 voices speaking as one, echoing in my head, a chorus of dry, raspy whispers. Join us in our world. Pain. They weren't just luring me. They were trying to break my mind, to shatter my will, and absorb me into their eternal torment. I saw a door, a heavy steel door that led to a maintenance tunnel, a way out. But it was on the far side of the cell block, through the ghostly ranks of the dead. I knew I couldn't fight them. I knew I couldn't run through them. But I had to try. I screamed, a raw, guttural cry of pure desperation, and charged. I don't know how I got through them. All I remember is the spectral hands pulling at my clothes, the phantom voices screaming in my head, the overwhelming weight of their despair threatening to crush me. I stumbled, fell, and crawled, every fiber of my being screaming in protest. But I reached the maintenance tunnel door, threw it open, and dove inside, slamming it shut behind me. The darkness in the tunnel was absolute, but it was a blessed darkness, a darkness devoid of ghostly presences. I lay there, gasping, shaking, tears streaming down my face. I had escaped, but I hadn't left unscathed. I felt, voice drops to a chilling, resigned whisper, different. The silence that used to bother me in the prison. It's inside me now. The doctors say it's shock, trauma, but I know what it is. I can still hear the distant shuffle of feet, the faint tap, 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 deep in my mind. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I feel a cold touch, a spectral hand brushing against my skin. I never went back to Eastern State. I couldn't, but the inmates, they never left me. They're still there, in the quiet corners of my thoughts, in the shadows of my memories, whispering. And I'm afraid that one day, I'll stop fighting them, and I'll finally understand their despair. A long, shuddering sigh. And then, I'll join them.